Good afternoon. I'm Rory Hancock, and it's a great honor to be speaking with you today, especially since I'm the newest member of the Captain Franklin J. Roselle chapter of the D.A.R., and it's Women's History Month. And I don't need to tell you that right out there, that flagpole and that bronze marker was planted by a woman in this chapter in 1929. And someone just told me that this is the 360th meeting of this chapter. She's holding up a sign. It's the 408th meeting of this chapter. So you guys are pretty amazing record keepers. But that puts into perspective the weight that you have placed on me when you asked me to come and speak to you today on patriotism. I can only guess that after what our country has been through these last few years, that you want to hear from what the newest members have to say. We've all been through a national nightmare, but rather than focus on how that happened or how it ended, I would like to focus my remarks to you today on what I learned as we've all endured it. Now, as you know, I'm not a public speaker, so please forgive me if I look at my notes while I'm talking to you, and they're not on paper. It's the 21st century, so they're on my computer. Although my grandmother was a member of the D.A.R., during most of my life, when people asked me if I was patriotic, I would say somewhat tongue-in-cheek, "You bet. I love our national parks and I love baseball." Oh, did you hear? I just heard on the way here that Hank Aaron just died. Could we have a moment of silence in his honor? Thank you. And thank you, Hammer and Hank. Let me be honest. It has always been very hard for me to put my hand over my heart, whether it's for the Pledge of Allegiance or the national anthem. How can I pledge my allegiance to this one country without standing up for all people everywhere? As a human being, I'd rather pledge my allegiance to God as I know God to be. And as a Christian, I don't pledge my allegiance to a flag. I pledge my allegiance to Jesus the Christ. As for the indivisible part, I have no problem with that. It's just that I feel indivisible from all of Earth's people, along with all of Earth's creatures, its waterways, its landforms, and so to speak, to every beast of the earth and every bird of the heavens and to everything that creeps on the earth. In any case, the range of the national anthem makes it impossible for any normal person to sing. I mean, what were they thinking? And if it is sung, it should definitely be followed by play ball. The thing is, in recent events have made me realize that I'm more patriotic than I thought. I do like Ken Burns' appellation for the national park system, America's Best Idea. And unlike when the national anthem is sung, I get chills and tear up when America the Beautiful is sung. And it's even singable. As for baseball, something about it evokes images of immigrants making their way to this new country, of immigrant kids playing it on the streets of the Lower East Side, and of my first generation dad watching the ball game on our 13-inch black and white Philco. I mean, maybe baseball is like mashed potatoes and meatloaf. It's comfort food. But over the past 4 years, I've discovered that there are other things I'm patriotic about, like the Constitution and the rule of law and the system of checks and balances. I'm patriotic about presidents who understand these things, maybe because he or she studied them in 12th grade or even 8th grade and paid attention. You know, at least took it for pass, fail, and passed. But even so, you know, expecting a future leader to get an A in American history or American government kind of seems like a good idea. I'm patriotic about our country's ideals because they are ideals, and many of us keep striving to meet them. I mean, the way I strive to be a little bit more like Christ, even though people keep telling me that Jesus didn't really mean to give all your goods to the poor and only meant to welcome the stranger if that stranger wasn't Muslim or possibly Black. I'm patriotic about those ideals. I believe in what the Statue of Liberty stands for. Recently, I got to see her in her green glory from the river. And with the way we've been treating the tired, the poor, the huddled masses yearning to breathe free, my heart was tearing at me. Then I wanted to put my hand over my heart. A few weeks ago, at the suggestion of my son, who was living in New York, I took the Sky Tram to Roosevelt Island. And walking under the cherry blossoms to the southern tip, I stood silently reading the words carved in granite at Four Freedoms Park. Then I wanted to put my hand over my heart. I'd arrived a bit late in the day, just as the island's cherry blossom trees were the whole festival was ending. I guess I'm patriotic about cherry blossoms too. When my daughter was in 8th grade, with the full support of her public, not charter, middle school principal, I took her on a 3-week tour of Connecticut and Massachusetts, an American history tour. We visited what seemed like everything. We visited from Mystic Seaport, Connecticut, where we hoisted sails on a schooner, to John Adams' house in Quincy. We walked the Freedom Trail in Boston and read gravestones and ate at an oyster house that had been frequented by Ben Franklin. At Mystic Seaport, we saw where they built a replica of the slave ship, the Amistad. And then in Boston, we boarded that replica and we descended into the quarters where the slaves would have been chained. We followed the path of Paul Revere and Billy Dawes and Samuel Prescott. And I sat for an hour in the Old North Church, imagining lanterns and considering that night. We walked the 5.5 Battle Road Trail from the North Bridge in Concord to Lexington, the path of the opening battle of the American Revolution. We toured Plymouth Plantation and one night carried lanterns into a dark graveyard as a tour guide searched for ghosts. We learned that it was the Wampanoag who made it possible for the Pilgrims to make it through that first long winter, that it was they who shared their food with the new immigrants that first Thanksgiving, not the other way around. We drank fresh pressed cider, watched a blacksmith, played 9-pins and hoops at Old Sturbridge Village, and ate dinner with Charlotte Bronte at its Bullard Tavern. In Lowell, we toured a textile mill where docents turned on the sound so we could hear how deafening it was for the children and the immigrants who worked there. We learned about Louisa May Alcott's father and his experiment with socialism at Fruitlands, where we also tasted the best pumpkin soup I have ever had. We stood in the room where we imagined Louisa writing Little Women. We visited the homes of Mark Twain and Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, and we saw that they lived just across the lawn from each other. And we learned of the salons in Mark Twain's parlor, where intellectuals shared all kinds of ideas. We walked around Walden Pond and rode bikes on Cape Cod. And after a waiter explained how, we ate lobster in Rockport, Maine. Each night, I had Molly, my daughter, write in her journal, to which she affixed picture postcards and later photographs once we got home and we could have them developed. I wanted Molly to understand our country, its history, what it stands for. Did I mention that I'm also patriotic about Bob Hope and Bing Crosby? And that I tear up at the end of both White Christmas and It's a Wonderful Life? I simply don't believe for a second that that's corny. Because, like George Bailey, I repudiate the concentration of income or power or the making of decisions in the hands of a few greedy plotters. I repudiate the undermining of truth and the respect for a free press, too. I repudiate any erosion of women's rights and voting rights. I repudiate domination by any one cultural group, be that of white men, the banks, the 1%, the oil magnates, anyone. I repudiate the undermining of freedom of religion and the separation of church and state. I repudiate the undermining of our system of justice and repudiate the use of government service for private gain. I repudiate the sale of military weapons to other countries, and I applaud the selling of democratic ideals to them, something we can only do if we're living out those ideals here at home. An oligarchy is not a democracy. Dignity. Dignity. I believe I understand the unmet goals and noblest ideals of this country. I try to pass them on to others. I will always resist any administration that attempts to normalize the shredding of our Constitution, our rule of law, our goals, ideals, our history, our aspirations, our experiment in democracy, our welcome to the immigrant and the refugee, our respect for people of all faiths and all cultural and ethnic backgrounds. I refuse to say that these things for which this country stands are not worth remembering and consistently, against all odds, working for. I study history as I taught my daughter to do that autumn in New England. And I remember I joined the D.A.R, quote, to cherish, maintain, and extend American history, education, and patriotism, unquote, as our chapter's website declares. I hope that all of this makes sense to you, even if I don't put my hand over my heart as we sing the national anthem. Thank you.